Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this virtual conference presentation. I am Jefferson Bailey of the Internet Archive, and I am presenting the conference talk, The Whole Earth Web Archive, as part of Session 7, National Domains at the IIPC Web Archiving Conference in 2021. This is a virtual remote presentation, but I look forward to the live Q&A session that will happen on June 15th to talk about the presentation. So in the spirit of remote conference presentations in the COVID era, I've got my conference lanyard out and I've put my COVID vaccine card in the place of my conference badge. So just getting in the mood of conference presenting virtually in COVID. And also, I have my trusty pandemic puppy also sitting beside me for this conference talk. So thank you, pandemic puppy. In the spirit of Zoom, recording Zoom conference presentations, let me share my screen and get on with the chat. So hopefully folks can see my screen. As mentioned, my talk today is about the Whole Earth Web Archive, a project that we did at Internet Archive, and I'm gonna talk about here for you today. Again, I'm Jefferson. I'm Director of Web Archiving Data Services at Internet Archive, and there's my email, jefferson@archive.org at the bottom. So let's get the slides going. So we sort of, the Whole Earth Web Archive is acronymized as WEWA. We call it WEWA. So I'll use that throughout the slides. My outline here today is I'll talk a little bit about the origins of the project, some background that led us to building this, this interface and access site, some of the ideas and principles behind it, a little bit about the technical build. I'll do a quick demo of the site, which is online at the archive, and I'll share the URL here in the thing, and then talk about current and ongoing work related to this project. So what are some of the origins that sort of led us to create this, as we call it, Whole Earth Web Archive Access portal? One is sort of just looking at the landscape of web archiving institutions, using here a signal of that as IIPC memberships and their respective geographic locations. I think we all understand that the web archiving community is highly represented, overwhelmingly represented by North America and Europe. And you can see here just on the member map of IIPC that many entire continents and obviously huge swaths of the world are not represented in IIPC membership, and many may be doing web archiving or archiving their own national domain, but many are not and simply haven't the resources or the technology or the expertise or many of those things to participate in this community. Of course, many IIPC members, Internet Archive especially, but plenty of others, are capturing content outside of their own country code top level domain, their own CCTLD, or from any nation related to a topic. So it's not that this material is not necessarily getting archived at all, but obviously systematic efforts or large scale efforts to collect large portions of web content from many nations is something that we as a community should think about. So just the geographic distribution of large web archiving institutions was something that got us thinking about this project, and sort of summing those up as bullet points. Web archiving remains largely the dominion of first world countries, primarily North America and Europe, as we know. The barrier of entry to web archiving remains very high for many countries, for the reasons I mentioned before: technical, human, social, procedural, policy, legal, all the things that we all deal with as part of running our web archiving programs. Many large and well-resourced institutions have specific mandates or specific curatorial focus that is their job and their duty and their mandate, but means that they aren't going to be looking at the content from other nations as part of their archiving activities. And so when we think about our collective web archive, the aggregate of all our collections across all the institutions and many nations that are doing it, we should always be asking ourselves, is that global collective collection representative of our collective cultures and our planet and our many nations on Earth? Parenthetical, no, it probably isn't. But we're trying, and I think we can all work towards that and do better. And one of our ambitions of this project is sort of take a little proof of concept as a functional piece of technology, but also as a sort of advocacy or provocation for all of us that do have the resources and do have the expertise and can help smaller nations or smaller institutions in underrepresented nations, facilitate archiving the important cultural content that is on their web domain. So those are some of the origins of the project. Some of the background, I guess, of the project is maybe from a more technical or service perspective, is that we had been thinking in the Internet Archive around this idea of a nationwide web instead of the World Wide Web, doing much domain harvest of our own, doing many CCTLD domain harvest in partnerships with national libraries, our government agencies around the world. This idea of a nationwide web, which is the whole culture and representation of a nation as it exists on the web, in web published materials, is something we've been thinking about and pursuing as far as building some of the technology pieces and indexing pipelines and things like that, and capturing and harvesting programs around that. So how can we sort of have a Wayback Machine that is just for a single nation? That was an idea that we've been playing with before we pursued the Whole Earth Web Archive project, which is sort of a distillation of that, as we'll talk about. These sort of nationwide web projects aggregate contents from any type of harvesting. It could be the sort of global scale harvesting that IA does, the domain scale harvesting that national libraries and ourselves also do. It can be from special topical curated collections, and it can even be from contributed harvested material from those who do web crawling but don't necessarily archive the data. And they're often doing that irrespective of CCTLD or TLD or domain or anything like that. So I think we can bring all these together behind the scenes and build a sort of search vertical that is very bounded by the idea of a specific nation. It doesn't mean it is completely specific to a CCTLD. It could include web archive material that it is in that nation's language, but could be on a .com or a .net, and other sorts of content hosted in that country that is maybe not on the CCTLD. So defining a nation not specifically by a URL path or a domain name, but by an idea that can then aggregate these web collections. These usually are smaller than some of than maybe huge many-year domain crawls or IA's global crawling. And so they also allow for some new thinking around how we do search and discovery indexing for search and some of those kind of ideas. So being somewhat smaller collections, there's a little more ability to manage the complex technical issues related to discovery, full text indexing, interlinking, and things like that. So Nationwide Web is not just a concept, but it also was a platform for having some affordances around discovery and access and user experience that we might not be able to do in something like the Wayback Machine. So we built some prototype demos. These are just us thinking of what they would look like. These are not all functional, and they don't represent that we worked with these institutions necessarily, though we did work with many institutions in doing this. But you can build little UIs that are maybe built, hosted by Internet Archive, hosted by the National Library, constructed by themselves, that start to think about this idea of nationwide web. Many national libraries, of course, do this and provide maybe reading room access or some form of access to their own CCPLD harvesting. But is there a way to do this without the actual domain crawling? It was part of the creative thinking, and just aggregating a lot of data related to a domain, putting it together. What are some of the features that we came up with? These I don't think will blow anyone's mind. They are very familiar to all of us as part of our use of traditional search engines, Google and Bing and whatever else you might use. But these can be hard to do at large scales for very large web archive collections. But some of these nationwide web collections are small enough that we can actually start to implement similar search filters and narrowing that we're all familiar with in our regular use of day-to-day search engines. So you can see, term, keyword, even full text search in many cases, as well as filtering by format types. They can be, of course, URL search as well as keyword and full text search. So you can do different types of search, and then you can do those within different types of formats and media. We chose these, which is of course full text, pretty common, full text, images, audio, video, and then PDFs. You can, we made these buttonized, so you can be doing multiple searches across multiple formats at the same time. So you don't have to just narrow it to one, you can start to combine them. There, of course, are interesting questions in how you weave in the results that come from those multi-MIME type searches, as well as relevance ranking, which is always sort of a challenge in web archives since you have longitudinalism, which is the best result across something that might have been captured many times over many, many years. So lots of interesting behind the scenes technical decision making and search tweaking and parameters and things like that, which I won't talk about too much here, but I think those are good things for us as the web archiving community to discuss how we're doing that. So happy to answer questions about that. It can also allow us to do, we did a little creative thinking around how to do display results. What's the critical information? The traditional calendar page that you get in Wayback Machine and many other similar Wayback-like environments for search and discovery is not something that we wanted to land on again. That's pretty known and widely used. We could, of course, do little snippet views, which are obviously common in Google or something else, but we haven't done too much of before ourselves. So we can do screenshots of the home pages. We can obviously do previews of the images. And for something that isn't previewable, of course, you can just use an icon or something like that. Yeah, we added, as you can see in the screenshot here, some. You can of course click to the latest capture, which is what most people want, but you can also go to a couple of other different things. The earliest capture, the most recent capture, the calendar page showing all captures, and then what we call site stats. So this goes through, just demonstrates some of those. Site stats is something that just tells you more about how this website or host or domain has been archived over time. Obviously, these are all pointing to things in the Wayback Machine, but this is all sort of open source, or we're using open source visualizations for these host domain site statistics, as we call it. And we'll look at one in the quick demo. So that was sort of, you sort of took the, how are underrepresented nations being archived in web archiving, and how can we try to improve that? And nationwide web is a technical service sort of thing that we had been doing, combining these ideas, and we sort of had a mission statement, I guess, for our Whole Earth Web Archive project, which is, I will very briefly read it, or quickly read it. It's a proof of concept. It is functional, and I'll talk a little bit about the tech, to explore ways to improve access to the archived website. So what we, at least Internet Archive and our partners who use our services or have contributed data to the Wayback Machine, the archived websites of underrepresented nations. We started with a sample of 50 small nations, and I'll talk about that a little more. Extracted all the content that was in total within Internet Archive, built a special search and access feature on top of it, and created a fun little UI portal that we'll look at in a minute. So that was sort of combine these background and origin thinking and just sort of landscape analysis of who was doing what in web archiving. And we did this little demo. So that's what we'll talk about. And then we'll talk about further work too. So the other ethos, obviously diverse archive, we are going to be continuing to improve the collecting of this material. We sort of started with what we have, and then we're obviously showcasing it via this little proof of concept prototype, which is, I guess, functional. So maybe it's a production level service, but it also is prompting us to improve our collecting, to improve our collaboration and outreach to the national libraries, our universities, our cultural heritage organizations in these countries, at least these 50 that we've started with, to see if there's possibility for further collaboration, for doing crawling for them, to giving them data, to seeing if they already have data, to having them participate in curatorial activities that can let us know what we're missing or what is most important. And at the end of the day, we can leverage the Internet Archive infrastructure, our capacity to run super big crawls and a lot of them, and do these type of prototype access portals and things. And that can hopefully help improve the equity and inclusion of smaller and underrepresented nations in the overall web archiving community, not just from an access and discovery perspective, but from professional involvement and social good and social inclusion. So the tech build, we took this nationwide web framework that I talked about, and we applied it to this set of the 50 smallest countries. How did we determine what are the 50 smallest countries? We basically looked at the equivalent of their zone file. So measured by the number of websites on their national domain. It's an imperfect gauge of smallest, but we were one of the smallest by web, not the smallest by population or gross domestic product or some weird metric. So that was how we came up with smallest, and it was a good round number. We then, of course, we extracted all that information. We built special indices around search and have a continual ingest pipeline so that as Internet Archive and our partners and our various services collect material, it sort of gets fed into the WAWA service automatically on an ongoing basis. And then, of course, we added some special features that we'll look at. So yes, 50 CCTLDs, we'll look at them in a minute. I'm not sure how much aggregate data that represents in the archive, but the search index itself is over 100 million documents. So there's 100 million URLs are in this. And the search index is 120 gigs, which is pretty large for a search index. I don't know, I don't have a ballpark metric for what that would translate to as in total data volume represented if we were to extract all the works and things like that and put it on drives or something, but a lot of content. We, of course, ran a special WAWA crawl before building this, and we are continuing to run them. And the seed list for that, just to give you a sense of like the 50 smallest, if you add up all their zone files or the sites that we know of on their CCTLDs, it ends up being about 20,000 seeds. So what were the issues in this? Well, we didn't have great content in the past. We hopefully have better recently, and we'll have better ongoing. But so since we did build these filters where you can look at just audio or just video from a very tiny domain, in some cases, there isn't any video from a very tiny domain in the web archive. Looking backwards, hopefully more looking forwards, or that media might be on social media or off the CCTLD in a way that we don't know, and that wasn't at this point included in the project. There's of course ranking and relevance challenges whenever you start to look at search indices that are this complex, and always the performance, especially when you're trying to do multiple types of search query, support multiple types of search queries, and then allow multiple types of filters, including multi-filter by format things. Those can get to be very complex inquiries into the search index and the search cluster, which we use Elasticsearch for what it's worth. And so there can be some lag in the return of the results. So some performance challenges to think through. What are some of the other things that we did as part of the program? We have been pursuing funding. If someone wants to, a generous philanthropic foundation would like to give money towards this, we have talked to some of them, and there have been expressions of interest that would help do more outreach, some promotion, have better connections to the communities that we're talking to, that we're representing in this interface. We could go beyond 50. We could do the 100 smallest or the 150 smallest. I don't know what the cutoff would be, but certainly more countries could be included. There's partnerships and outreach. Can we support these institutions if they want to do this themselves? Can we give them something they can bake into their own library services or their own website? Is there the possibility for folks to, because we do work with other institutions that can prioritize the most important stuff on their domain, that is government stuff or stuff that is most important that is on social media or off domain. So I think there's curatorial potential. And then of course, if folks have content to put into this interface, then that's possible too. We are doing ongoing collecting and indexing, as I mentioned. We have outreach going. Would love for the IIPC community to help us with that or to contribute if folks are interested in helping make connections to institutions in some of these nations. And I think our future, of course, together with other institutions, with the IIPC, with some of our strategic consortial partners, and of course with other national libraries and large curatorial and cultural heritage institutions, is to make sure that we have a pluralistic, inclusive, equitable, and globally representative web archive amongst all our various institutions. So that's about it. I'm about 20 minutes. I will go over to the site to do the demo. It is webservices.archive.org/WEWA, W-E-W-A. We got some great help from our UI UX team who helped us think about cool interfaces to do for this. This was another fun part of that. It allowed us to do some interesting things that we haven't done in any of our Wayback Access interfaces. So if you go up here, as you see, you can look at all the 50 things, the Marianas.mp, Solomons.sb, Vatican City.fa, Congo.cg, North Korea. And of course you can do it. We did this little top sites, what's most highest ranked by inbound links. So some fun, we can do some little screenshot previews of some of the most important sites. We're using the Wikipedia API to pull in a little info box about the country, which is the same as Google. It also pulls in this little image of the shape of the country, so you can see if you change, these all update. And then, as I mentioned, we're using the Site Stats API to talk about how much content has been is in the web archive for Aruba, and get a little scroll over, and then we have some information about the project there. And then of course you can search, or actually I didn't want to do Aruba. My demo was going to be for Antarctic, my favorite one. I'll get this. Go to the Antarctic, pulls up the top sites, get the old Wikipedia info box with a little picture of it here. You can see, again, the top sites, the search. Here's it auto-populates search results just for the name of the country, which you can see here. And I already demoed most of this in the presentation, so I won't go too far. But of course, you could do penguin images, and it will automatically do the search. And there's some ever cute images of penguins doing just an image search on penguin in the .aq domain. So you can see the URL down here. So not too much else to demo. Of course, at this point, you can just go into the live site. You can go into the recent capture of the archived site. You can go earliest versions calendar page. And then let's look at an example of site stats here for whatever this was, environments.aq. I'll show you some environments and stuff like that. So really quick demo. Certainly encourage anyone attending this or watching this, attending it virtually, watching it asynchronously, to check it out. Email me, Jefferson@archive.org. If you have questions, if you're interested. I think part of this presentation was to just get the word out about this project and see how we could further it, change it in collaboration, especially with other large web archiving institutions that might have capacity to help collect this material. You might have connections to small nations that don't know about this project, or that we could talk to about partnering if they had curatorial guidance or content to contribute, or wanted to promote this to their own user communities. So again, it's on the webservices.archive.org/WAWA domain. That's it. I went long, even virtually, but thank you again for attending, and hope to see everyone in person again in the future. Thanks.